In a packed Atlanta courtroom, Alicia Bennett sits silent, her gaze steady, as Judge Victoria Harland leans forward and says, "You will speak now, or learn humility behind bars." Marcus Reed had never seen the courtroom this full. He'd worked here for almost 2 years, mopping floors and emptying trash before and after sessions. But today was different. He'd taken his lunch break a little later than usual, lingering near the doors when the buzz about Bennett started spreading down the hallway. Something about the way people whispered her name kept him from leaving. He slipped into the second row, just behind the row of local reporters with their legal pads ready, and tried to make himself invisible. The Fulton County Courthouse had an old-world heaviness about it. High ceilings, tall windows, letting in strips of pale autumn light, the kind that made the dust in the air look like it was hanging in slow motion. The oak benches creaked under the weight of the crowd. Even the air felt different, tighter, charged. Alicia Bennett sat at the defense table wearing a charcoal gray sweater and black slacks. No shackles, no orange jumpsuit, but something about her posture made her stand apart from anyone Marcus had ever seen in this room. Her back was straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes fixed forward. Not nervous, not defiant, just steady. Ethan Cross, the assistant district attorney, was eating up the attention. Young, white, and full of the kind of confidence that came from winning more cases than he deserved, he paced slowly as he addressed the court. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we're not here because of what Ms. Bennett said. We're here because of what she didn't say. In the world of national security, silence can kill." The reporters scribbled furiously. Cross took a few steps toward the jury box, his polished shoes clicking against the wood floor. She was entrusted with the nation's most sensitive secrets, and when we needed her most, she chose silence. That silence cost lives, and now she chooses silence again. No testimony, no defense, just arrogance. Marcus glanced at Alicia. Not a flinch, not even a blink. The woman could have been carved from stone. Rachel Ortiz, her attorney, sat beside her, her brow tight with tension. She glanced sideways at Alicia now and then, like she was silently pleading for her to do something, anything, to break the stillness. Judge Victoria Harland sat above it all, her black robe pressed sharp, her white hair pulled into a bun so tight Marcus wondered if it hurt. Her voice was even sharper than her robe, each word landing like a gavel. "Ms. Ortiz, has your client chosen not to participate in her own defense?" Rachel cleared her throat. "Your Honor, my client reserves her right to remain—" "She's already done that," Harland cut in, her tone icy. "And it's not serving her well." A quiet laugh came from somewhere in the back corner. Harland didn't even look up to stop it. Marcus shifted in his seat. There was something in the judge's voice that didn't sit right with him, not just the authority that came with the job, but something else, something personal. The morning wore on. Cross threw around phrases like silent threat and uncooperative to the point of danger. Every time he spoke, he would pause just long enough to let the words soak into the air, waiting for them to take root in the minds of the jury. Alicia never moved. Then Harland leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Ms. Bennett," she said slowly, "you will speak now, or you will learn humility behind bars." The room seemed to freeze. Marcus noticed even the bailiffs had gone still, their hands hovering near their belts. Alicia lifted her head slightly, meeting Harland's eyes without a shred of fear. The silence stretched so long, Marcus could hear the hum of the ceiling lights. "Bailiff," Harland said finally, her voice sharp, "remove the defendant." 2 officers approached, their steps deliberate. They each placed a hand on Alicia's arm, not rough but firm. She rose smoothly, like she'd been expecting this moment all along. Marcus leaned forward instinctively, sensing something was about to happen. At the threshold of the courtroom door, Alicia paused. She turned her head just enough to meet Harland's eyes again. Her voice came out clear, precise, and cutting. You've confused silence with surrender. That's your first mistake. The words landed like a stone dropped into a still pond. No one moved. No one breathed. Ethan Cross blinked hard, his smirk faltering for the first time all morning. Harland's lips parted, but no sound came out. Alicia didn't wait for a reaction. She let the words hang in the air like smoke, then walked through the doorway, leaving the room in a stunned, absolute silence. In the holding cell, Alicia sits across from her lawyer, Rachel Ortiz, who whispers, "Why won't you defend yourself?" The chill in the temporary detention wing wasn't just from the recycled air. It was the kind of cold that clung to metal and memory, that made every surface feel like it had been wiped clean of anything human. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, washing everything in a flat, unkind brightness. On the other side of the thick glass pane, deputies moved with the steady rhythm of people who had learned to mute their feelings between clock-ins. The door clicked behind Rachel, and for a second the sound felt too loud, like the room flinched. Alicia didn't. She sat as she had in court, back straight, hands folded, gaze steady. The gray sweater looked softer in here, almost out of place against the cinder block walls and the bolted steel table. Rachel eased into the chair opposite her, set her briefcase down, and pressed both palms on the folder she'd brought in. She had spent most of the lunch hour sorting exhibits and talking herself out of fear, but none of that mattered once she met Alicia's eyes. Calm, not cold, not vacant, just calm. "They're painting your silence as a weapon," Rachel said, keeping her voice low. "Cross is winning the optics. The judge isn't stopping him. I need you to give me something to work with, anything." Alicia's glance slid to the side and back again, like a person watching a thought cross a hallway. "I hear you. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give right now." Rachel rubbed the bridge of her nose, then pulled her hands away as if she'd been caught being too human. "We can ask for a short recess and file a motion to compel disclosure about that so-called new video. We can push back on evidentiary grounds, lack of authentication, chain of custody issues." "They'll bulldoze it," Alicia said gently. "You saw how she looked at me." Rachel swallowed. The judge's eyes had carried something personal. Disdain was too polite a word. "All the more reason to fight on the record," she said. "Make it undeniable. You know this system. You crafted parts of it." The corner of Alicia's mouth lifted. Not a smile exactly, more of a private acknowledgement. She reached into the pocket of her slacks and took out a small square of paper, worn at the folds, edges feathered by time. She laid it on the table without unfolding it, like setting down a photograph you didn't want to show yet. "My mother's handwriting," she said. "Last note she ever left me." Rachel looked at the paper, and then at Alicia. "What does it say?" Alicia didn't answer right away. The silence between them wasn't the kind that made people restless. It was the kind that made them pay attention. Through the glass, a deputy checked a clipboard, scratched something with a dull pencil, and walked away. "She was a teacher," Alicia said finally. "Montgomery, public school. Spent years fighting so the quiet kids didn't get labeled as problems and pushed out. She used to tell me, not everyone who raises their voice knows what they're talking about. Not everyone who stays quiet is empty." Rachel waited. Alicia touched the edge of the paper, then opened it with the care people reserve for objects that have already survived too much. In a neat, looping script, "Justice doesn't scream, it endures." "She'd put that on my pillow the night she came home from a board meeting," Alicia said, the words even. "They wanted to expel a black student for attitude. She refused to sign off. 2 weeks later, they called her disruptive and took her job. She folded laundry like it was a vote. Then she left that note." The room seemed to lean in. Rachel felt the phrase settle in her chest, heavy and right. "I believe you," she said. I just... She spread her hands wide, searching for the right shape of the thought. "I want them to, too." "They can't," Alicia said, not unkindly. "Not yet." Because belief is a conclusion," Alicia said. "We're still in the middle." Rachel let out a small breath that wasn't quite a laugh. You always talk like this? Only when it matters. The fluorescent lights gave a faint buzz, like a distant horn. Rachel took out a legal pad, ready to pivot the conversation into something usable in a courtroom. "Walk me through what you can say," she said. "We can protect a lot with privilege. We can lock certain things under seal. I can file an ex parte motion if we have to. Give me contours, names, dates, anything you're comfortable with." Alicia's gaze softened. "I was the Chief Legal Counsel at Langley," she said, choosing each word like it was glassware. "I wrote internal protocols for intelligence operations, conflict zones, interagency coordination, whistleblower protections. There's a statute they're misusing in there," she added. "You've seen it." Rachel's pulse actually kicked. "The National Intelligence Protection and Internal Risk Safeguards Act?" A nod. July 2016, a framework to protect high-level operatives from politically motivated prosecution or internal retaliation when they raise concerns. It was meant to be a shield for people who were isolated by design. It wasn't to protect lawbreakers. It was to protect truth-tellers, while an honest review could be done. "And now they're using it as the sword," Rachel said, anger thinning her voice. "To call you a threat, to make your silence sound like guilt." Alicia didn't lift her eyes from the paper. "Swords are loud." "And shields?" Rachel asked, surprised to hear herself play along. "Shields endure." Rachel tapped her pen on the pad and stopped, embarrassed by the sound. "If we present proof you authored the original draft, they'll call it irrelevant," Alicia said, still calm. "Drafting a law doesn't put you above it. They'll say the law was passed by Congress, signed by a president, and it can't be hijacked by authorial intent. They'll call it theatrics if we make it a story about who I was." "Who you are," Rachel corrected, before she could stop herself. Alicia finally looked up. There was a steadiness in her that didn't feel like stubbornness. It felt like alignment. "Who I am isn't the point right now," Rachel's throat tight. "With all respect, it is to me." A shadow of surprise crossed Alicia's face, gone almost as soon as it appeared. She folded the note again, gentler than before, pressed it flat, and slid it back into her pocket. "They erased me," she said. "Not metaphorically. The bureaucracy did what it does best. Files vanish. Retirement paperwork, lost in transmission. Training records, system migration. I used to joke about the agency having too many basements. Turns out, some are deep enough to swallow people whole." Rachel felt a flare of professional fury. "We can subpoena records. They'll say they're classified. We can ask for in-camera review. They'll say national security." Rachel's jaw tightened. "I'm not naive." "I know," Alicia's voice softened. "That's why you're sitting here." On the other side of the glass, two uniformed deputies shared a brief exchange and then split off in different directions. A cart rattled down the corridor and disappeared. The ventilation kicked on, whispering through the vents. "Tell me about the video," Rachel said. "Who benefits from introducing it now?" "The person who believes the performance is the product," Alicia said. "Who wants the front page and the headline and the clip that gets looped on the evening news?" "Cross," Rachel translated. "He's a symptom," Alicia said, "not a cause." The sentence hung there, like it was measuring the room. Rachel leaned in, her elbows on the table now. "What are we waiting for, Alicia? What's the end game? Because I can fight every procedural battle they throw and still lose the war, and I don't want to learn after the fact that your plan was something I could have helped with." Alicia's eyes warmed a degree. "You are helping," she said. "You're doing the part that needs to be done out loud." "And you're doing the quiet part?" "The gravitational part," Alicia said. Rachel blinked. "Meaning?" Alicia took a breath, the first one Rachel noticed that looked like she needed it. "Do you remember physics class?" she asked. "You pile weight on a structure not built to hold it. You may not see the crack right away, but the strain is there. Add more weight, and more. The failure isn't dramatic at first. It's slow, then it's certain." "You're letting them pile weight," Rachel said quietly. "Bias. Sloppy procedure. a fraudulent chain of custody, judicial comments that should never be made on a live record. You're letting it all stack. So it can't be explained away as an isolated lapse, Alicia said. So it becomes undeniable to the people who don't want to see it, because denial is the last defense of a system that knows it's wrong. Rachel felt a tremor in her hands and set the pen down. And if the weight crushes you on the way down? Alicia's mouth twitched. Then it wasn't worth saving. Rachel sat back. She detected no martyrdom in the answer, only a clean, unsentimental calculus that came from knowing how institutions behave when they're cornered. She thought of her own time as a public defender when an intake prosecutor once told her off the record, "We don't have to prove guilt. We just have to drain you of time." She hadn't slept right for a week after that. "You keep a lot inside," Rachel said. "It's where it can't be twisted," Alicia replied. The door buzzed somewhere down the corridor. A sign-in clipboard clacked. Rachel looked at her watch and felt a small panic crawl up her spine. They didn't have much time before the afternoon session. She opened her folder, flipped to a tabbed section she'd marked in red. "I went digging last night," she said, unable to keep the small pride out of her voice. "Archives most people forgot existed. State-level indexes, early drafts stored off-site, hard copies that were never fully digitized. Your name is there, Alicia. Not just initials, your handwriting on a margin note about whistleblower retaliation. It proves authorship and intent." Alicia didn't outwardly react, but Rachel saw something pass through her eyes, a startle of light underwater. "Where did you find it?" "Georgia Legislative Information System microfiche, and in a print binder filed at a law library that hasn't updated its catalog since the Cubs won the series." Rachel allowed herself a thin smile. "I have the copies, certified. If they move to strike, I can still make the record. If they refuse to review, I'll offer to summarize and cite line numbers in open court." Alicia nodded once, gratitude threaded through the small movement. "You're good." "I'm motivated," Rachel said, "by the truth and, frankly, by the way Harland looked at you like she'd already written the conclusion." "Some people write conclusions first," Alicia said, "and then look for evidence that sounds like the middle." A deputy walked past the glass again and did a double take, as if surprised to see both women still composed. He moved on. Rachel lowered her voice. "There's one more thing," she said. "I can file a complaint with the Judicial Ethics Board regarding the courtroom conduct. It may not move fast, but it creates a parallel track. If we pair that with a motion for a mistrial—" "Not yet," Alicia said, like she was setting a glass down without a clink. "Why?" "Because a mistrial puts the pieces back in the box. They get a do-over with clean optics. I'm not interested in their second draft." Rachel stared at her, the edges of a stubborn admiration coming into focus. "You think 3 steps ahead, even when you're the one in the chair." Chairs are temporary," Alicia said. "Patterns are not." Rachel let that sit. Then she asked, almost against her own better judgment, "Who erased you?" Alicia's eyes tracked to the ceiling for a beat and back. "Erasure is never done by one hand," she said. "It takes a culture. It takes an appetite. It takes people who benefit from your absence and people who are relieved by it." "Then why not expose them?" Rachel said. "All at once. Names, dates, memos. You of all people could do it clean." "Exposure only works if people are looking for the right thing," Alicia said. "And a lot of people don't look at black women and expect to see a truth they need. They look for a mistake they're ready to punish." Rachel's face softened. "I hate that you're right. I hate that it's useful," Alicia said, with no heat in it. They sat with that for a moment, sharing the taste of a bitter fact without commentary. Somewhere down the hall, a door wheezed open and closed. The lights made their patient hum. "You said your mother lost her job," Rachel said. "Did they ever apologize?" Alicia's smile was the kind that moved only in the eyes. "An apology is a way to keep the story short," she said. She liked long stories. Rachel exhaled a breath that almost counted as a laugh. I bet she would have liked you here. She would have brought a sweater, Alicia said, and a sandwich, 2 for you and me. They both smiled, and the room loosened just enough to let them breathe. Tell me one thing, Rachel said, leaning forward again. Why trust me? We barely know each other. I want to be worthy of this, but I want to understand why you let me sit in this chair across from you. Alicia tilted her head. Because you didn't ask me to be louder, she said. You asked me to be clearer. Rachel looked down, surprised by what that unlocked in her. She had spent years being told by courtroom culture to up the volume, to out-theater the other side. Clear had not been on the menu often enough. The buzzer on the door clicked. 5 minutes. A deputy's voice came through the intercom. Wrap it up! Rachel nodded toward the speaker, then back to Alicia. Okay, she said briskly. Here's my plan for the next hour. I'll move to challenge the admissibility of the video again for the record. I'll present the legislative drafts with your authorship, with citations, and lock those into evidence or at least into the transcript. I'll object to prejudicial phrasing, silent threat, arrogance, cost lives, as improper argument, not evidence. If Harland overrules, she overrules. But the pattern is the point. I'll force Cross to say out loud what he's counting on the jury to infer. Alicia listened like a builder listening to a weather report. Good, she said. And Rachel, yes? When he looks more confident than careful, that's when he's most off balance. Rachel's mouth curved, noted. The deputy's steps got louder outside. Rachel reached for her briefcase, closed it, then paused with her hand on the handle. I'm scared, she said. Not as a confession, but as a fact placed on the table among other facts. Of what? Alicia asked. Of losing you to a story they wrote for you, Rachel said. Of watching them pretend the script was always true. They can't write what they don't understand, Alicia said, and they don't understand me. Rachel stood, then sat back down for one more second she hadn't planned on. One last thing. If there's anything, or anyone, I should know about, alliances, old enemies, internal agency politics, anything that could walk through those courtroom doors and blindside us, tell me. Alicia thought about that longer than Rachel expected. What blindsides most people, she said at last, isn't a person. It's the realization that they've been speaking in an empty room. Rachel frowned. Meaning? Meaning they've been performing for each other, Alicia said, and forgetting there are systems outside of their theater with rules they didn't write. The deputy opened the door. Counselor? 2 seconds, Rachel said, holding up a finger without looking away from Alicia. She squeezed the handle of the briefcase and then asked a question that had been tapping on the edge of her mind since morning. Do you want me to ask for your testimony? Alicia's answer came soft, steady, controlled. Not yet. Rachel nodded. She stood, collected herself, adjusted her blazer, and picked up her folder. The room felt colder as soon as she did. She reached across the table without thinking and touched the back of Alicia's hand. It was a quick, human gesture, the kind that would look like nothing on video and everything in memory. You're not alone, she said. I know, Alicia said. Rachel held her gaze for a beat more, then turned toward the door. The deputy stepped aside to let her pass. She got to the threshold and paused. Something about Alicia's earlier words snagged at her. Gravity. She looked back. Alicia had returned to stillness, hands folded, eyes quiet and bright, as if the room's hum had tuned itself to her frequency. The door swung open. The hallway was a ribbon of waxed linoleum and low conversation. Rachel took 1 step out, then 2, feeling the familiar buzz of adrenaline line up with purpose. She could do this part. She would carve the record. She would name the moments that weren't supposed to be named. As she walked, she pictured the courtroom, the raised bench, the jurors' tired eyes, the way Cross angled his chin when he thought a camera might catch his profile. She pictured Marcus in the second row. She hadn't noticed him yet, but she would, sitting very still, the way people sit when they know they're in the middle of something larger than whatever they woke up expecting that day. She rehearsed her opening in a whisper, the words tasting like flint. Your Honor, the defense objects to the introduction of unauthenticated video evidence. She imagined Harland's interruption and decided where she would hold her ground and where she would step aside to let the record show itself. She imagined the sound the gavel would make when it landed just slightly too hard, the way it did when a judge wanted finality more than clarity. She was almost at the end of the corridor when she understood something that made her stop for just half a heartbeat. Alicia wasn't waiting for a rescue. She wasn't waiting for a moment when the crowd might turn sympathetic and hand her back her name like a favor. She was waiting for the weight to do what weight always does when the structure underneath is wrong. Rachel realized Alicia was waiting for gravity, the weight of their own lies to make them collapse. Marcus Reed had never been one to stick his neck out. Working as a court clerk wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. He came in, kept the paperwork moving, kept his head down, and went home. But ever since Alicia Bennett walked into that courtroom, something had been gnawing at him, something he couldn't quite shake. It wasn't just her silence. It was the way she wore it, like it was tailored just for her. Most defendants who refused to speak did it out of fear or defiance or plain bad advice. Alicia's silence felt intentional. That morning, he sat at his desk in the corner of the courtroom, half buried in files. Outside, the October sun struggled to cut through the haze over downtown Atlanta. Inside, the hum of the fluorescent lights blended with the shuffle of shoes and the rustle of legal pads. Judge Harland took the bench right on schedule, her black robe catching the light. "This court is now in session," she announced, the words rolling out like cold steel. Ethan Cross wasted no time. "Your Honor," he said, rising from the prosecution table. "The state would like to submit new video evidence recently acquired. It confirms the defendant's active communication with foreign agents prior to the classified leak." Marcus froze mid-note. New evidence? Now? That was supposed to be impossible this late in proceedings. The bailiff wheeled in a TV cart, the kind that still smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant, and plugged in a flash drive. Grainy black and white footage appeared on the screen. A woman with Alicia's posture shook hands with a shadowy figure. No audio, no timestamp, no clear faces. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The reporters scribbled harder. Rachel Ortiz shot to her feet. "Objection! This footage has no authentication, no source verification, and it was never disclosed during discovery." Judge Harland didn't hesitate. "Motion granted. Entered into evidence." Rachel's voice rose. "Your Honor, this court is rushing to convict my client on shaky—" "One more word," Harland cut in, "and I will revoke your license to speak in this courtroom." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Rachel sat down slowly, her knuckles white around her pen. Alicia didn't move, didn't even blink. Marcus felt a slow, twisting heat in his stomach. From where he sat, he could see the angle of Harland's body shift, leaning ever so slightly toward Ethan Cross. He caught her voice, low and meant for no one else. "She'll walk in like a threat, crawl out like a ghost." The words hit Marcus like a slap. He looked around. No one else seemed to hear it. His fingers itched toward the phone in his pocket. For a second, he hesitated. Recording in court without permission was risky, maybe even illegal, but the thought of letting those words disappear into thin air. His thumb slid across the screen. The red light blinked to life. Down at the defense table, Rachel leaned toward Alicia, whispering, "They're throwing everything at you. They're not even hiding it anymore." Alicia's lips barely moved. "Good. That means they're close to slipping." "You still won't speak?" "I'm not here to play defense," Alicia murmured. "I'm here to let them expose themselves." Marcus swallowed hard. His pen hovered over the page, but his focus had shifted entirely to the quiet war happening right in front of him. Cross let the video play again and again, milking every shadow and gesture for drama. The jury's faces were stiff, unreadable. The judge's expression never changed. But Marcus could see something else, a spark behind Alicia's stillness, a sharpness in her gaze. She wasn't beaten. She was waiting. When court adjourned that afternoon, Marcus stayed behind, shuffling papers until the last of the lawyers filed out. Only then did he slip the phone deeper into his pocket, the recording safe. He didn't know what he was going to do with it yet, but for the first time since this trial began, he knew he couldn't just watch. Rachel Ortiz barely slept that night. She kept seeing the grainy video loop in her mind, over and over. Alicia's silhouette, the handshake, the shadowy figure. It was garbage as evidence, but Judge Harland hadn't blinked before admitting it. By morning, Rachel's coffee sat untouched on her desk, growing cold as she scrolled through an endless maze of legislative archives. She wasn't looking for the video. She was looking for something else, something she could actually trust. Her eyes stopped on a title, National Intelligence Protection and Internal Risk Safeguards Act, July 2016. She clicked. At the bottom of the original draft was a name, A. Bennett. Rachel's pulse kicked. She opened 3 other archived versions, cross-referencing signatures, amendments, and drafts. Same author, same statute. She sat back, the irony hitting her like a punch. The very law the state was using to prosecute Alicia had been written by Alicia herself, and it was designed to protect operatives like her, not condemn them. When court reconvened that morning, Rachel walked in with the kind of energy that made Marcus glance up from his desk. She stood tall before Judge Harland, holding the printed records high. Your Honor, the defense submits legislative documentation showing that the statute being used to prosecute Ms. Bennett was authored by her. This goes directly to intent and expertise. Gasps ran through the gallery. Reporters' pens scratched faster. Ethan Cross was on his feet in an instant. Irrelevant. Drafting a law doesn't place someone above it. Rachel didn't miss a beat. It speaks to the fact that you are weaponizing a legal tool against the woman who designed it to protect people like her. Motion denied, Harland said flatly. The court will not entertain theatrical distractions. Rachel's voice rose, sharp now. That's not a distraction. That's context. That's motive. You're distorting the statute beyond recognition. And then, for the first time in hours, Alicia stood. The room froze. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. They weaponized what I wrote, Alicia said, her tone calm but cutting, and they still can't understand it. This law wasn't made to silence people. It was made to protect them when they were silenced. But you took a pen and turned it into a noose. The silence afterward wasn't passive. It was electric. Marcus could feel it in the floorboards. Even the judge didn't bang her gavel right away. Somewhere outside these walls, Alicia's earlier words, "You've confused silence with surrender," were already trending. Clips were circulating. News anchors were calling the case politically charged and unprecedented. At his desk, Marcus felt the weight of the phone in his pocket. The recording of Harland's whisper, "She'll walk in like a threat, crawl out like a ghost," had been burning a hole there since yesterday. He swallowed hard, opened his laptop, and navigated to an encrypted DOJ whistleblower portal he'd only heard about in passing. His fingers hovered over the trackpad, then, with a sharp breath, he uploaded the file. The screen flashed. Submission received. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in his quiet, rule-following career, Marcus had thrown a wrench into the machine. Rachel sat back down beside Alicia, lowering her voice. "You just gave them a glimpse of who you are." Alicia didn't look at her. "I didn't need to. The law already speaks." "Then why say anything at all today?" Alicia's gaze drifted toward the judge's bench. "Because sometimes you have to remind the wolves that you wrote the rules of the hunt." Rachel felt a shiver crawl up her spine. Somewhere deep in the courthouse, something was shifting. The case was still alive, but the ground beneath it had started to crack. The tension in courtroom 4B felt different that morning. Not just heavy, predatory, like everyone inside was waiting for a break in the silence so they could pounce. Rachel Ortiz adjusted her blazer for the third time, her eyes flicking from the door to Alicia. Alicia sat as she always did, still, composed, hands folded loosely on the table. If she felt the pressure, she didn't show it. Judge Harland swept in at precisely 9:00 a.m., her robe cutting a sharp line as she mounted the bench. "This court will come to order." Ethan Cross stood slowly, as if savoring every second of control he thought he had. "Your Honor," he said, "the prosecution is prepared to resume with our final witness and additional exhibits." Before Harland could respond, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. 2 men in dark suits walked in, the kind of suits that didn't come off a rack. Their steps were measured, and the room seemed to tilt toward them without meaning to. They didn't sit. One stepped forward, producing a folded document. His voice was firm, clear. "From the United States Department of Justice, effective immediately, all proceedings in this matter are to be paused pending federal investigation into procedural misconduct." The words detonated in the silence. Harland froze mid-motion. Cross's jaw clenched so tight his cheek twitched. Rachel blinked, stunned. Alicia's face didn't change. She stood slowly, almost gracefully, and for the first time since this trial began, she reached for the button on her blazer. Marcus Reed, at the clerk's desk, felt his heartbeat trip. Something was about to happen. Alicia unfastened the jacket, her movements precise, deliberate, like choreography she'd rehearsed 100 times. From the inside pocket, she drew a slim black ID wallet. Official, federal, edged in gold. She flipped it open and held it high enough for the gallery to see. Alicia Bennett, Chief Legal Counsel, Central Intelligence Agency. The gasp that tore through the courtroom was almost physical. Someone in the gallery dropped a pen. Cross took a step back without realizing it. Harland's face lost a shade of color. Alicia took a single step forward, her voice carrying without strain. "I did not remain silent because I lacked a voice. I remained silent so they could reveal who they truly are." Her gaze locked on Harland. "You didn't just rush to judgment. You tried to erase a life, my life, because you assumed a silent black woman must be hiding something." Then she turned to Cross. "You twisted laws you never understood, built your case on shadows and fear." She glanced toward the DOJ officials. One nodded. "We confirm Ms. Bennett's identity and clearance. She was operating under federal authority when these charges were brought. A full investigation into misconduct, evidence tampering, and judicial bias is now underway." The gallery erupted, not in cheers, but in a rising murmur of disbelief. Rachel exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. His eyes were locked on Alicia, who had just shifted the entire center of gravity in the room without raising her voice. Harland's gavel came down once, sharp, but it sounded thin against the wave of whispers. She knew it. Everyone knew it. The trial wasn't over, not technically, but the balance of power had just flipped. Alicia closed the ID wallet and slid it back into her pocket. "I told you," she said, almost to herself. "Silence is a weapon." And in that moment, Marcus understood. She hadn't just been defending herself. She'd been baiting them, letting them build their own trap, and now the jaws had snapped shut. A week later, Alicia walks alone through Greenwood Cemetery in Montgomery, Alabama. The afternoon light lay soft across the rows of stones, as if the sun had decided to speak more quietly here. There was a breeze, enough to stir the pecan trees and send a hush through the leaves. Alicia followed the gravel path without hurry, her shoes making a sound that belonged to places where time moves differently. She carried no flowers, only a small, folded square of paper. The edges worn the way edges get when they've been held through too much. She found her mother's name, Lorraine Bennett, teacher, believer, cut into the granite as clean as the day it was etched. She brushed a tiny lace of dust from the top of the stone with the back of her fingers and then sat on the low cement lip that framed the plot. For a moment, she didn't do anything more than be there. The world had been loud in its own way all week. Press conferences, statements, red banners crawling across screens, but none of it had touched this spot. The quiet here didn't need to prove anything. She opened the paper and read the line she knew by heart anyway. Don't demand justice, embody it. She had been 15 when that note appeared on her pillow, handwriting still damp from the pen, her mother's jaw set in that way it got when people called her emotional for refusing to look away. Alicia folded the paper back to its small square, like returning a secret to its proper size, and let her hands rest in her lap. Footsteps sounded behind her, the careful kind of steps that belonged to someone who didn't want to intrude. "Ms. Bennett?" a man's voice said, gentle at the edge. She turned. He wore a school custodian's uniform, navy shirt, work pants, a cap held in both hands as if it might say the wrong thing if he kept it on. Middle-aged, face that had done its share of days. He looked from the stone to Alicia and back, throat working. "I was one of your mother's students," he said. "5th grade. She told me my voice mattered, even when others didn't hear it." He pressed his lips together, like he'd offered too much. "I never forgot." Alicia's eyes softened. "You remembered the right part," she said. He nodded, gaze flicking again to the carved letters. "I figured you didn't want company," he added, stepping backward. "I just wanted to say thank you for reminding folks." "Thank you," she said. The words landed clean, needing no ceremony. He tipped his head, put the cap back on, and walked away the slow way people do when they're making sure they didn't break anything by being there. When the path was empty again, Alicia looked down at the stone. "They never gave you your title back," she said, the way people talk in kitchens, not in courtrooms. "But the work is still standing." She set the folded note at the base of the marker, tucked just enough under the lip that it wouldn't blow off, and sat a while longer, letting the breeze pass over her like a thought that didn't require a reply. It had been 7 days since the 2 men from the Department of Justice stepped into courtroom 4B and put a lever under the whole proceeding. 7 days since Alicia had opened the black ID wallet. Not like a trick, not like theater, but like a record being corrected in front of the people who had tried to write it for her. 7 days since Judge Victoria Harland's robe had looked heavier than it had the day before. 7 days since Ethan Cross wore the face of a man who knew the audience had changed, and he couldn't see the balcony anymore. The next morning after DOJ arrived, 2 U.S. Marshals had waited at the security line downstairs with a sealed order. Ethan Cross never made it to his seat. There were no cuffs in view, no voice raised, just the stillness that happens when a warrant does the talking. The cameras in the hallway caught nothing worth looping. Somehow they'd been aimed a few degrees away at the moment that mattered. So for the evening news, it was all panel speculation and phrases like, "developing story." Inside, the bailiff had called the court to order, his tone caught between routine and whatever the opposite of routine was. Judge Harland took the bench with a tightness at the jaw, a set to her shoulders that looked like a person remembering how to sit. Her voice wavered once, then found its shape as she read from the page in front of her. It has come to the court's attention that evidence presented was falsified, and that the prosecution engaged in deliberate misconduct. The room did that collective inhale people do when something long suspected walks in wearing a name badge. Then came the line no one expected to hear, at least not from her mouth. "I am hereby instructed to recuse myself from this case, effective immediately." She tried to stand the way judges stand, but there are days when legs tell the truth first. She steadied herself on the bench and stepped down, not looking at anyone, not even at the place where Alicia sat. Someone in the gallery let out a small laugh that wasn't cruel so much as relieved, the way a room sometimes laughs when a tight lid finally gives. That afternoon, a short press release from the state's Judicial Oversight Commission appeared on the county website, 3 paragraphs, no adjectives, announcing a review of cases associated with Judge Harland's courtroom. By evening, a longer statement came from DOJ, confirming a broader look at prosecutorial conduct and chain of custody protocols. Cable shows rolled the language across their chyrons like threads to pull, each host stitching a version of the same quilt: accountability, irregularities, systemic, trust. Marcus Reed watched it all from his small apartment on the south side, a paper plate with 2 slices of pizza growing lukewarm on his coffee table. He'd turned the volume down because he didn't need to hear the talking heads tell him what had happened. He'd heard it the second his phone buzzed with the message, "Received. Thank you for your submission." He set the remote down and picked up the phone, thumb hovering as if he might get another message that said the first one counted more than it did. Then the phone rang. No caller ID. He almost didn't answer. "Mr. Reed?" a woman's voice said, crisp in that way federal voices get, when they know exactly how much to say and no more. "This is regarding the audio you provided. We reviewed it. What you did was risky. It was also necessary." He swallowed. "Am I in trouble?" "Not with us," she said. A pause, not unfriendly. "You may be contacted as a witness. Be advised you are protected under the federal court whistleblower program. We appreciate your courage." He tried to make words, then realized thank you was the only one that fit. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Reed," she said, and the line clicked off. He set the phone down and stared at his hands. They looked like the same hands he used to mop stairs at the courthouse, the same hands that refilled water pitchers before court, the same hands that wrote in small, neat letters on docket covers so everything looked accounted for. In the cheap reflection of the dark TV screen, he saw a man who had finally decided there was a difference between keeping the system moving and keeping it honest. The thought scared him and steadied him at the same time. Across town, Rachel Ortiz stood in her kitchen and watched a pot of water come to a boil without noticing. The stove clock said 9:12 p.m. She'd been back from court for hours, but hadn't made it into real time yet. When her phone buzzed, she assumed it would be another reporter. Instead, it was an email from a law professor she admired but barely knew. "If you're willing, we'd like you to guest lecture next term on the ethical use of silence in adversarial systems." The subject line read simply, "The Bennett Case." She closed her eyes for a beat and let herself smile. Small, private, earned. Then she turned off the burner, forgot what she'd planned to make, and poured herself a glass of water instead. It felt like the right thing to drink at the end of a day that had tried to scorch everything. The next days moved like a careful procession. A plain white statement appeared on the Georgia State Bar website, noting that allegations regarding prosecutorial misconduct are being reviewed. A second page listed case numbers flagged for re-examination, dozens of them. The phrase Monroe Standard didn't show up in print. Monroe was another life in another story. But people in offices started using a nickname anyway for a simple idea. If you can't defend the process, you can't trust the result. A reporter on public radio read through the list on air, voice steady and low, the way people read the names of things that matter to strangers. Downtown Atlanta, halfway between a lunch spot that still served meat and 3 and a mural of a civil rights march that had watched over the street for years, another mural went up. It was Alicia in a navy suit, not heroic, not posed, just standing the way she stood, eyes steady, a folded sheet of legislation in one hand. Below her, block letters, "You don't need a mic to make history." Folks took pictures as they walked by. Some just stopped and nodded, like the city had said something back to them they needed to hear. Alicia saw none of it in person. She avoided cameras with the same ease she'd avoided applause. She didn't post. She didn't sit on a couch under studio lights and let someone ask her questions she wouldn't answer. When Rachel called to offer to arrange a controlled interview to shape the narrative, Alicia thanked her and said the narrative wasn't the point. "Let the record speak," she said. "It has a better memory than television." She did, however, send 3 emails, each only a few sentences long. one to the dean of a law school that had quietly asked if she might consult on a new ethics curriculum. "I'm unavailable. Consider inviting the public defenders who've been saying the same things for 20 years without a camera. One to a small nonprofit that trained court watchers. Keep your clipboards. Keep your patience. Keep going. And one to Marcus Reed." The subject line said, simply, "Thank you for remembering what a record is." He didn't reply, but he didn't delete it. He kept it in a folder he labeled Things That Count. Back in Montgomery, Alicia left the cemetery as the light turned to a warmer gold. She didn't feel triumphant. That wasn't the word. She felt aligned, as if the part of her that knew how to carry things had finally put this one down in the right place. On her way out of town, she stopped at a small diner she used to visit with her mother on Saturday mornings. Nothing fancy. Vinyl booths, a bell over the door that pinged when it opened, a waitress who called everyone Hun without checking ID. She tipped well, the way her mother had taught her, and left without being recognized. If anyone thought she looked familiar, they kept it to themselves. She drove back to Atlanta on the highway that's carried more stories than any book, a long ribbon of asphalt lined with billboards and pines, and the occasional hand-painted sign for boiled peanuts. She kept the radio low, news murmuring under the hum of the tires. A panel discussed institutional reform like it was an elective. A caller from Macon said his cousin had a case reopened and cried on the phone this morning. The host tried not to cry with him. Alicia turned the volume down another notch and let the quiet fill in. By week's end, a press conference took place on the courthouse steps. Not a circus. Somehow the temperature had dropped in the coverage, but a crowd large enough to make the microphones look small. A spokesperson for DOJ read a statement about confidence in judicial outcomes and ongoing audits. When a reporter shouted, "Will Ms. Bennett speak today?" the spokesperson said, "Ms. Bennett has nothing to add at this time." The phrasing pleased Alicia. It sounded like the absence of a headline, which is where truth often lives. Inside a small conference room 2 floors up, Rachel and Marcus sat across from each other for the first time without a bench between them. They had been called to discuss procedural next steps, witness lists, document retention, what would and wouldn't be public while the investigations continued. The government lawyer in the room took notes like a metronome. When the meeting ended, Rachel lingered. "You did something I didn't," she said to Marcus. "You turned toward it when it would have been easier not to." He shook his head. "You did your part out loud. I just pressed record." "That wasn't just," she said. He looked at his hands again. "I used to think my job was to make sure things flowed," he said. "Now I think it might be to make sure they don't flow around the truth." Rachel smiled, small and real. "Maybe that's everybody's job." He nodded, then asked, almost shy, "You think she'll ever give an interview?" "About as likely as she'll start a podcast," Rachel said, which made them both laugh, the kind of laugh that doesn't erase the seriousness of anything but lets air back in. On a Sunday morning, a national talk show used the last 5 minutes of its hour to air a short segment. No soundtrack, just still images and a quiet narration. A courthouse door, a hand holding a folded piece of paper, a mural. The narrator said, "We still don't know where Alicia Bennett is. No book deal, no interviews, not even a social media account." He paused like it mattered to remember. "But her silence," he said, "may be the loudest truth our justice system has heard in years." Across the country, the story kept moving the way real stories do, by changing how people talked in rooms without cameras. A clerk in Savannah refused to backdate a form. A juror in Chattanooga asked the judge to clarify instructions when the language felt stacked. A young assistant DA in Raleigh threw out a case when an officer's report didn't match body cam timestamps and slept better that night than she had in months. None of them made the news. All of them mattered. At a high school in Richmond, Virginia, a new mural went up in a hallway near the civics classroom. It showed a black woman in a dark suit holding a rolled sheet of paper. The eyes weren't angry or triumphant. They were steady. Underneath, 5 words in bold paint. "You don't need a mic." On the day they unveiled it, students shuffled by with backpacks, and the particular noise teenagers carry with them like weather. A teacher stood to the side, hands in pockets, watching faces for flickers. In one class, a little white boy with a cowlick raised his hand and asked, "Was she real?" The teacher looked at the mural for a long second, then said, "She didn't need to prove that. Justice did it for her." Far from the mural, in a room without windows, Alicia read a draft policy someone had sent her quietly, a checklist designed to make it harder for a single courtroom to slide off its rails without anyone noticing. The language was dry, which pleased her. Dry language endures. She marked a few lines with comments, sent it back through a channel that didn't have a name a public person would recognize, and closed her laptop. She stood at the kitchen sink and let the water run over her hands until the chill felt like information. On the counter sat a small stack of mail forwarded from an address she hadn't used in years. Most of it was the kind you recycle unopened. Offers, catalogs, a coupon book. But one envelope had handwriting on it, block letters, careful. She opened it with a butter knife because that felt like the right tool for a letter. Inside was a note. "Thank you for showing me what courage looks like." It wasn't signed, but the careful lettering looked like Marcus had sounded on the phone, deliberate, decent. She set the note next to the folded paper with her mother's script and let the two be neighbors for a while. That night, in a living room somewhere in the city, a family watched the local news until the weather finished and the anchor smiled and said goodnight. The TV went dark, and the room kept a little of the glow. The grandmother in the armchair said, "Turn that light off, baby," and the little one did, padding back in socks and flopping onto the couch. In the hush that followed, the quiet wasn't empty. It had a direction. At the edge of all that, bigger than one case, smaller than a movement, people started asking different questions at dinner tables and in break rooms. How do we listen when someone doesn't speak? Where is the line between order and obedience? What's the difference between a system and the people who loan it their hands? Alicia didn't answer any of them. That had been the point. She stepped onto her small balcony and looked out at a city that had made room for her message without needing her face every night to hold it up. The air had the clean feel Atlanta gets after a fall rain, and somewhere below someone laughed, the good kind. She wrapped her sweater tighter and thought of her mother folding laundry like a vote, of Rachel's voice steady in a courtroom designed to take the steadiness out of people, of Marcus's thumb over a red light that meant more than 1,000 speeches. She closed the balcony door and turned off the lamp. The quiet came with her, strong as oak, soft as cloth. A little girl in Virginia asks her mother, "Can I be quiet like her?" Her mother smiles and nods. The courthouse has been quiet for weeks now, its steps bare except for the occasional passerby. Yet in certain corners of the city, the story of Alicia Bennett lingers like the scent of rain on warm pavement. Folks in the Black community still speak of the day she stood without raising her voice, turning the tide with nothing more than truth and patience. It wasn't a headline that faded. It became a kind of porch-light memory, the sort you carry into long evenings. Looking back, it's easy to see the temptation to judge too quickly. We live in a world that's always rushing, eager to decide who someone is before we've even heard them breathe. Alicia's path reminded us that dignity isn't loud, and that real courage often arrives without an announcement. The Black community, and many far beyond it, learned that the quiet work of holding one's ground can do more than win a case. It can restore a sense of justice where it's been worn thin. The lesson is simple, though living it takes practice. Stand steady in who you are, defend the truth with grace, and carry yourself in a way that leaves room for others to see their own reflection in your calm. The value of a life is not set by another's prejudice, nor is the strength of your story measured by the volume at which you tell it. Much like a lighthouse that keeps shining whether or not ships pass that night, the smallest, steadfast act can guide others through waters they've never dared to cross. So maybe we each have a part in this, to keep from mistaking silence for surrender and to watch more closely for the voices that don't always ring above the crowd. Somewhere, someone you've overlooked might be holding the very key to a better tomorrow, And when we honor that possibility, we do more than defend our own name. We stitch a little more trust into the larger fabric we all depend on. Take a moment, if you will, to sit with the heart of this story. Think of someone in your own life who's been misunderstood, and consider what it might mean to truly see them. If this journey has touched you, pass along the warmth, in your family, in your neighborhood, or in the Black community where the next quiet voice may be waiting. Sometimes, the truest victories don't echo in the halls of power. They hum softly in the spaces between people who finally understand each other.